Hello, this is Catherine Anderson, and I want to give you guys a background on the central banks because I think that's important to go back to see where we are now. And I think to understand money, you need to understand the central banks. Central banks, the financiers are in no sense public servants. They're simply paid agents of shareholders in a banking company whose interests need not be in the national interest. These banks are private. These are the people running the central banks. The number of new central banks increased, particularly after the establishment of the Bank of International Settlement, called the BIS, at Basel early in 1930. When central banks sprang up all over the world amid a chorus of approval from deluded governments, media, and people whom these banks were intended to reduce to servitude. In reality, the BIS guides and directs the centrally planned global financial system through the central banks of each country. Bi-monthly meetings where the global economy is discussed are held in absolute secrecy. Minutes are not kept. They had a far-reaching aim to create a world system of financial control in private. I'm trying to read some of my stuff. In private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system to be controlled in a feudalistic manner by the central banks of the world. The apex of the system, the BIS, in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, also private corporations. The bank, like the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve Bank in the U.S., etc. They seek to dominate the countries they govern by its ability to control treasury loans, to manipulate foreign exchanges, to influence the lever of economic activity in the country, and to influence cooperative politicians by rewards in the business world. And this is back, I'm talking in the 30s, and this is here again right now. That's why I'm going over it. It took a mere 6 years for the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank to destroy the dollar. Between 1914 and 1920, prices rose 125%, reducing the value of the dollar by 56.1%. Theft of the American laborer and the American people's money. To rein in prices, the secret bankers meeting was held May 18, 1920, in Washington, D.C., under the misleading title of the Orderly Deflation Committee of the American Bankers Association. So they, without warning, raised the discount rate from 2% to 9% and beyond, and the Federal Reserve began to sell government bonds. The farm product index dropped by more than half May 19th, a year later. Many farmers were ruined. The unlimited powers of the Federal Reserve Bank possessed had enabled it to contract the currency and credit of the U.S. by $2 billion. The results, prices cut in half, and confusion and distress. This policy was carried out with deliberate intent to impoverish the agricultural sector, like today, by transferring rural money to city centers. At the same time, reducing America's food independence, making us vulnerable to the whims of the financial speculators and swindlers, like today, your big BlackRock, etc. July 1921, the Federal Reserve revised its policy by repurchasing government bonds. However, damage had been done and the agricultural banks had been destroyed. So in 1927, bankers running the privately owned Federal Reserve decided it was time to create a new boom. So they lowered their discount rate and embarked on a massive government bond repurchasing program to boost the money supply. Hardly any of the newly created money went into productive investments. Oops. But was poured into the stock market, i.e. like now. The deluded news media and deluded economists announced the arrival of a new and permanent prosperity, which fully fanned the flames of the stock market speculation. March 9th, 1929, Paul Warburg, a Freemason and founder of the Federal Reserve, advised all member banks and U.S. Secretary of Treasury and fellow Mason Andrew Mellon to get out of the stock market. He said they would reap enormous profits as it was about to collapse. October 1929, the Federal Reserve decided to put an end to the gigantic amount of speculation and to commence the fleecing of the people. The rediscount rate was suddenly increased to 6%. From nowhere, thousands of orders arrived at the New York Stock Exchange to sell at market, a strategy to knock down prices rapidly. Confidence soon evaporated, and the first intentionally planned Great Depression was in full swing. And I'm telling you all this and describing it because we're being set up for the same now. 6 days later, October 30th, 1929, the Fed ordered the contractors of broker loans, the contraction of broker loans. Okay, here. 6 days later, at October 30th, 1929, the Fed ordered the contraction of broker loans. The stock exchange went into a tailspin. By 1932, the value had fallen by 83%. The economic and social consequences were devastating, leaving many banks desperate and ruined. 200,000 companies filed bankruptcy, and 8.3 million people were thrown out of their houses onto the streets. 24.9% of the working population was unemployed. The national income went from 81 billion to 48 billion. 3 million people died of starvation, malnutrition, infectious disease, and suicide. A wonderful congressman back then, Louis T. McFadden, said, and I quote, it was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair so they might emerge as the rulers of us all. Similar to today. Okay. The international financiers in command of the U.S. Reserve do not want stable conditions. They want unprecedented booms and slumps since its establishment has been made deliberate. Carl Gustav Castle of Stockholm University said, practically absolute power over the welfare of the world has been placed in the hands of the Federal Reserve Board, who has cheated the government and people of the United States. The Federal Reserve is a private monopoly which preys on the people of the U.S. to benefit itself, foreign customers, and foreign domestic speculators and swindlers. Money, for example, was taken out of the U.S. to finance the Japan war against Russia. They created a reign of terror in Russia to help the war along. They financed Trotsky's mass meetings of discontent and rebellion to assist in the destruction of the Russian Empire. The Federal Reserve Act destroyed the U.S. and the old way of doing business. Congressman, again, Louis T. McFadden, the wealth and working capital of the U.S. has been stripped and been either locked in federal banks or foreign banks and corporations. We need to return to the Constitution of the United States and divorce bank and state. Rockefeller was behind the scheme to draw women into the labor force and the income tax net, place children in schools at an early age to indoctrinate them, destabilize society, and set up a new world order. Finally, this excessive concentration of power and wealth based exclusively on dishonest banking methods has enabled a tiny minority of criminal bankers to control the media, educational processes, and brainwash the public into suicidal practices of savage, bloody wars, pointless wars, and cultural degradation. All wars are bankers' wars. And I'm saying this now because what happens, it's the fiat system is a debt-based system. It's a slave system. And it's at the end of its life cycle. And so the credit markets are freezing up. And the way to get them going and keep things going through the election is wars, because you can do endless money printing, of which finds itself in the market and keeps pushing the market up. I don't know by watching the credit markets how much longer they're going to be able to keep that up. That's why I think the wars are going to be increasing. So what we can do, I think gold and silver, to have some on hand, is a really good thing, when things collapse, or when we get put on a new system, we see if we want it or we don't want it. So it's a good thing to have your gold and silver. In fact, the central banks, the BIS, they labeled it a tier 1 asset. A tier 1 asset is the top asset you can have and has no counterparty risk. So I think to have some gold and silver on hand in your possession is a good thing. I cannot do that because I talk on this, but I have it in a private vault. That's also an option. Another most important thing is spiritually. It's the Lord. It's amazing that little small acts of kindness or loving holy moments can change the world, like the butterfly effect. A butterfly flapping its wings here can cause a tidal wave over in Asia. So little acts of kindness, I really believe that each of us doing little acts of kindness can greatly change things. I think it can change the world and the trajectory of where it's going. And I think it's desperately needed right now, because they are trying to take us to World War III, because the system is collapsing. So I think this is just the beginning. The Lord told me, so have faith in God. Get some gold and silver, but do small acts of kindness every day. Jesus had a select few, and that changed the world. That's his method. So doing little small acts every day of love and kindness, I believe, can change the world, can change the outcome of all of this. So this is Catherine Anderson. Have a blessed day.